So we are now beginning the some reflections on Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. And as if you're reading the book with us, you see that it's broken up into 5 chapters, but the chapters aren't called chapters; they're called staves, which we'll talk about that in a moment. But we've basically kind of come up with, as we've tried to tease out some things that we can talk about, 7 different possible things that we can draw out from the first stave. And there's plenty more. I mean, we just wanted to, we were kind of maybe getting to the point where that was good. 7's a good number, right? So, and they're not going to spend too much time on each of these, but it gives us, a lot to talk about and some things to ponder in the first stave. So maybe to start with, let's talk about the title of the book, and the fact that the chapters aren't chapters but staves. Do you want to say something on that, Nick? What is the full title of the book? A Christmas Carol?
It's really interesting. The full title is A Christmas Carol in Prose, Being a Ghost Story of Christmas. Really interesting.
Yeah. Why do you think I guess I have my own thought on that. Why do you think, or maybe do you know? Did he ever tell us why he did that way? Or
I don't know, and I've never looked it up. Tried to look it up, and I don't know that I really have a good answer for it in the sense of, I mean, A Christmas Carol, is a song that we hear during the Christmas season. It's supposed to, I guess, get us into the spirit of the season. And so maybe he's hoping that this little book, well, first of all, it's little, it's probably his shortest book. So maybe in that sense, it's like a song and that it's shorter. But maybe that, he's hoping this will bring holiday cheer to us, Christmas cheer, the way that a Christmas Carol is supposed to. What do you think?
No, yeah, I think that sounds right. Yeah, he could have called it like eggnog in prose, or something, verbal eggnog. I don't know, but I think there was a sense of like there's a connotation to A Christmas Carol that like we're so used to the title now, but when he first wrote it, it probably was a little bit of a, it kind of catches the ear, like A Christmas Carol, but it's a story. It's not a carol. Are we supposed to sing this? It's a long song, but it's in prose, so it's not, and then, a ghost story. What was the second subtitle? A ghost story.
Being a ghost story of Christmas.
Being a ghost story of Christmas, right? There's that song, that Christmas song of, the most wonderful time of the year. And there's the line in there about, there'll be scary ghost stories and tales of the glories of Christmases long, long ago, right? And I wonder if, did that start with this? Is that when this began? Like the whole idea of a ghost story at Christmas? I don't know. Was there any Christmas ghost stories before that? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. That's
it's an interesting way to. I mean, yeah, it's certainly a ghost story. Kind of has a visceral response that it calls for. It's not just cheery. It's not, it's kind of like the modern day, like romance stories that just happen to take place at Christmas. But it's like it appeals to both people who want a Christmas story and who kind of need something more than just a Christmas story. Maybe he was trying to reach us on a deeper level. Like there's something about ghost stories that like people might not read my Christmas story, but they will read a ghost story.
Right. Well, it's kind of a contrast, right? You wouldn't think of a Christmas Carol having to do with ghosts,
right?
Being connected with ghosts. So it's, yeah, it's a great title, I think, and it's so prevalent. I mean, everybody knows the story and they know the title, and it just has become one of those classics.
Yeah. And then, of course, stave is not a word we're used to. Maybe in Dickens' day in England, maybe they were familiar with it. I mean, it basically, as far as I know, it just means like a stanza, right? Like it's like the.
Yeah, I would guess. It's related to the word staff, maybe, and in a musical notation, you have a staff, but it's it's more like a verse, maybe, of the Christmas Carol. It's a Christmas Carol in 5 verses.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a way. I mean, I don't know. I haven't really sat down and done a huge analysis of it. Like as far as like, do they kind of does each stave kind of rhyme, if you will? Like are there things that kind of repeat? I mean, I guess there probably are. I mean, you look at the 3 ghosts, like they do basically do the same thing, but I don't know. I wonder maybe that was just like a nice little touch, you know.
Right,
Maybe,
right, yeah.
maybe we're
Well,
not
there
meant
is
to read
that
too much into it.
repeated refrain, so to speak, of Marley's ghost in the first stave, and then you have a ghost and a ghost and a ghost, and
Hmm.
then the end um, of the story. So
Hmm.
there's that kind of repeated pattern, and it's really easy. I would think if you were going to try and tell this story orally, to your child or to someone who's never heard the story before, because of that repetition, it would be pretty easy to say, kind of like the old, epic stories, or we see even in scripture, there's that repetition, and you can kind of tell. I bet that story was, or that parable was told orally, because it repeats the same thing with a little twist,
Yeah.
almost like the Three Little Pigs, like a nursery rhyme too, or so there's that repetition.
Right. Yeah. Which is just good pedagogy, right?
Right, yes.
So the second thing we want to look at is, after the title, before the story begins, there's this preface. I don't think he calls it a preface, but it's just like a short little paragraph where Dickens this is now Dickens speaking to us, saying, here's what I wanted to do. And what does he say? How does it, we were talking about this before we started recording.
He says, I have endeavored in this ghostly little book, first of all, he calls it a ghostly little book, to raise the ghost of an idea.
Mm-hmm.
So he's got something in mind.
Right. So I wonder if that's so there's a movie that came out a few years ago or last year, called, now I can't remember the name. It's basically about how Charles Dickens wrote The Man Who Invented Christmas, right? Did you ever see that movie?
Oh, no, I haven't seen it.
And the idea being that Christmas traditions and customs had started to wane quite a bit in England at the time, and so this story basically kind of revived, like it actually, like what the movie was trying to say is it actually did revive a lot of old customs, and so things that within the story it takes for granted, like we'll talk about Fred and their whole conversation, right? But this whole idea of, like, Christmas is the one time a year where such and such, and the two guys who come and try to collect some money for charity, like that apparently wasn't really that wasn't always the case up until that wasn't the case when he wrote the book. And I see movies and I think, did that really happen? So I go back and look it up, and apparently there's some precedent there that he really did kind of not reinvent, but reinvigorate some customs that had been just fallen out of the way, and people really didn't really think about Christmas anymore as much as they had before. And so maybe that's what he meant. I'm wondering if that's what he meant,
Yeah.
like that goes to the idea of being like we had all these things. There was a life to Christmas. He didn't, in spite of the movie's title, he didn't actually invent Christmas.
Right,
But
right.
there is maybe there were some customs that have kind of died, and now their ghost is still there, but we want to bring it back to life again, I guess. I don't know. What's another spin we could have on that, or
Yeah, well, I think there's some idea he's trying to get across, and maybe we won't know that until we get to the very end, or maybe because we know the story, we could kind of take some guesses at that. But yeah, maybe it is this idea of there's more to Christmas than just, in our day we would say there's more to Christmas than the commercial aspect of it. And maybe that's the reason why it resonates year after year after year with so many people, is that it is saying something important that we don't want to forget. This idea of there being more to life than what Scrooge has been trying to accomplish. But he does it in a way that he says, which shall not put my readers out of humor with themselves. So he's trying to do this in, I think, a kind of a gentle way. And may it haunt their houses pleasantly.
right?
Great. I just love the way that Dickens, picks an image or a phrase and then keeps using that and driving that point home and playing with the words. The word play he has is just great.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I mentioned to you before we started recording that I left my book over at the other church, so I don't have it with me. But I did want to say something or just maybe bring up the first opening paragraphs as well, because they I don't know, it's very witty. I think he has a good wit when he opens the book. Like, first of all, Marley is dead. That's an interesting way to start a story. And he points out, like, it's like the whole thing was just meant to, like, just keep saying, I need you to know he's dead. Like, he's not half dead. He's dead. Even these people signed his death certificate. Even Scrooge signed the.
Even Scrooge, yeah.
He's dead the way Hamlet's father was dead at the opening of Hamlet. He's dead, right? Marley was dead, and then the whole thing about dead as a doornail. Why is the doornail like such a? Why is that the phrase, right? He talks about that, how, like, I don't know why. It's just, but who am I to question the tradition of our ancestors who came up with that phrase, kind of thing. Like, I wonder if there's maybe like a parallel there between who am I to dismiss the Christmas traditions that we've all kind of that have fallen by the wayside, but I wonder if there's like an analogy there in that, but then also, I mean, I'll say something else about the doornail thing too, but I don't want to be the only one speaking. What do you think?
Well, I love the line, when he's questioning, why did our ancestors use this image of a doornail? What's so dead about a doornail? But then he says, but the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simile.
Mm-hmm.
And he uses so many similes in this story when he's describing Scrooge and his nephew. And I wonder if the whole book, in a sense, is a simile, and there's wisdom in this simile of A Christmas Carol, that he's trying to say, hey, I think there's something here to pay attention to. And he's a great user of similes. When we get to this description of Scrooge and even this whole idea of dead as a doornail, and Scrooge being as sharp as flint, and so I wonder if he's trying to say something bigger than just this clever exploration of why a doornail is dead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. I knowing Dickens, which I'm not a huge Dickens expert, but I do like Dickens. I've read other stuff of his, and I think he has a good way of, there's more below the surface of just the words we're seeing. It's not just telling the story, but there's also all these other layers there that I think he does a good job with. I wonder if also you could say, because he points out, well, like, I would think a coffin nail would be more dead. If a nail could be dead, a coffin nail will be more dead than a doornail. Why is it, and I wonder if there's this sense of that Scrooge, just like Marley, who, as we see, Marley is, he makes a point about how, like, I never left the coffers of my, money tables. I never left my, I just stayed holed up in my money changing room, and I never went beyond that and saw my fellow man, right? Like, that was like just a drop of the ocean in what was really my business, right? And I wonder if something similar could be said with Scrooge, that the door of his business, or the door of his house, whatever he was, for both of these men, there's a sense of, like, yeah, they're locked in their house and they don't leave, and they basically dead. And I wonder if too, if maybe there's a sense of, like, Marley was dead, right? That it's like, because there's such an emphasis on that, it wasn't just that he was physically dead, he was dead, like, really, like, spiritually dead. He was, and so too was Scrooge. That Scrooge, in a sense, comes back to life throughout the, as the story goes on, right? I don't know. Those are just some.
No, I agree. I think that's a good question to ask. Is Scrooge dead? Not in the way that Marley is dead, but on the way to becoming the way Marley is dead.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Which lends itself to the fourth point, which was that it's the whole idea of simile. Like, there's a particular simile he uses often throughout the book, more than others, that you pointed out. I hadn't thought about it before, but what was that?
Well, the idea of metal.
Mm-hmm.
We've got the chains on Marley. We've got Scrooge being described as, that we talked about, him being hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire. So he's, I think, I wonder if he's using metal to associate that with, the weight of the chains that Marley bears, and the potential chains that Scrooge might bear if he doesn't change. Money is made of metal, And so, is there some sort of, is if this is we'll have to see if he carries this through the whole book. But in the first stave, it's very prominent. And his nephew, on the other hand, glows warm. Metal is cold. Scrooge is cold. Metal is heavy. Marley's weighted down by his self-made chains. And so I just think that's a very interesting image to continue looking at as we keep reading, and to see if Scrooge is going to somehow change, if the description of Scrooge will change from being sharp as flint to, will he be warm like his nephew? Will he be, will there be some other simile used to describe him as we get through closer to the end of the book?
Yeah, there's a show called The Chosen, which I think is fantastic. There's only one season out, but it's basically about Jesus and the disciples, and it's really, really well done. There's a scene in the story where one of the episodes where one of the apostles is describing how he was a stonemason before, and he says, like, the difference between a stonemason and a smith is that smith works with metal, so if he messes anything up, he can go back and do it again. He can just put it back in the fire and reforge it. But with stone, once you make a cut, you have to commit to it. And there was like this parallel going on with Jesus, and it was really well done, I thought. But I wonder if maybe there was something similar there, like that he could be hard as stone, but he's not. He's hard as flint. He's hard as metal. But metal can be reforged. It can be refashioned. And so too with Scrooge, he can be made something new. And anyway.
Yeah. That's a great connection. I think that may be true.
So speaking of Marley and Marley's chains, and so we were kind of debating this, you and I, before recording, that what is Marley's fate? What was this a permanent thing, or is this more like a purgatory? And I tended to think that it was more permanent, it seemed, but I'm not closing the idea that maybe Dickens wanted to leave that open-ended. Maybe he wanted it to be something that was, you're not supposed to know. Is he making amends? You mentioned something that he's, I didn't catch this, but there's like a sense of, like, he says the word penance, like, I'm doing penance for her, right?
Yeah, I'm going to try and find that where he says that. I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girded it on of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. And then he says, that is no light part of my penance. I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate. So I don't know if that's a permanent penance. That, to me, when I read it out loud, it almost sounds to me like this is permanent. You have a hope of escaping my fate. This is my fate, and there's nothing I can do to change it, but I'm here to warn you so that you can avoid this fate. So I don't know.
But I think you're right. I mean, I can't find the quote, but I do. There were moments where it did seem like it left it open-ended. So I think you're right that it could be like kind of more of a purgative thing than permanent. But he doesn't use the word hell. He doesn't use the word purgatory. He just kind of more describes the image of it rather than try to give kind of like a theological spin to it or anything.
Right. Well, it's interesting too, near that same quote, he says, I have sat invisible beside you many and many a day. So I had never really, I must have just, gone by that before when I read it, because and that makes Scrooge, he says it's not an agreeable idea. He shivers, the idea that, boy, Marley's with him invisibly all the time, and it's only now that he's actually seeing him. What an eerie kind of thing to hear.
Yeah. And then when he talks about your chains, you have a ponderous chain, right? It's like not ponderous in the sense of like pondering things, like, but more of like heavy, weighed down, almost bulky, and so he kind of looks around him like, I have this chain here, like this, the ghost of my own chain, as it were, and
that's right.
Yeah, there's that sense of like, and it's kind of chilling. It's kind of chilling the way he describes it. And yeah, there's it does a good job with that, kind of just painting that picture, seems like I was going to say something else about that, but I slipped my mind, so I guess it's gone now. So,
Okay.
so that was point number 5, but maybe we tie that in with point number 6, which is that you know, there's the scene after Marley, like at the end of Marley's little what do you call it? His locution, his whatever. You know, he brings Scrooge over to the window, right? And he opens the window, and Scrooge can't help but look outside. He's curious because he hears all these groanings, right? And he looks out and he sees all these spirits, and they're actually trying to interact with the world, right? And they're trying to you know, like the one who sees the woman with the baby, and he wants to help her, right? But he can't. And there's a line in there where it said something like that their penance, if you will, or their torture was the fact that there was good that they wanted to do, but no longer had the power to do it, right? Which is an interesting way of describing, you know, the punishments that they're going through. Like I think we normally just think of, you know, the punishments of, you know, souls in hell or whatever, or even purgatory, that there's a sense. I mean, maybe that's one of the things that maybe lends it to more of a purgative thing, right? Like I'm not, my heart isn't hardened to my fellow man. You know, I want to help, but I no longer have the power to do so, right? And the fact that I no longer have the power is itself the thing that is punishing me, right?
Right.
And I wonder if something similar I wonder if that line seems to be kind of prescient of the whole book, that Scrooge is trying to, you know, find the spirits are trying to stir up in him compassion that he ought to have. Like, he has the power, he just doesn't have the will. You know, he just doesn't desire it anymore. And whereas with the ghost, it's the exact opposite. I now want to help you, I no longer have the power to do so, right? And so Scrooge has to kind of have that stirred up in him so that he'll do the thing he has the power to do while he has the power to do it.
Right. There's a friendship between Marley and Scrooge, and maybe that's the best thing about Scrooge's life. Maybe he's got all these other areas that he's, you know, lacking in, but he was really appreciative of Marley coming back, and he even says at one point, "You were ever a friend to me."
Mm-hmm.
And he asks, Scrooge asks Marley, "Why do spirits walk the earth? Why do they come to me?" And the ghost of Marley says that the spirit, it is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men and
Mm-hmm.
travel far and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death.
Mm-hmm.
Is doomed to wander through the world. Oh, woe is me, a witness what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth and turned to happiness. So it's almost like every one of us should walk among our, you know, our fellow, you know, the people in our lives, travel far and wide. And if we don't do that while we're alive, we're going to be condemned to do that after we die.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was and like that, and I think it was that same section he was talking about how like their sufferings came from the fact that seeing the missed opportunities that they had in life, that will, and which I think is a very good insight. Like that, I mean, I think we probably will, when on the day of judgment, you know, will God show us, like, here's all the opportunities for good that you had that you said no to, you know, and you could have, like, every one of those would have brought goodness into the world, right? But we say no, and we all do it, you know, and we hope for the mercy of God afterward. Right?
That's right. That's right. Yes. Yeah.
Anything else on that, or?
No. It was another part of the book that I had not remembered.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think you see that and you know, most of my familiarity with the story is through movies, or, you know,
Sure.
I read the book a long time ago. And so you won't see that kind of thing in a movie, really.
Right. Yeah. And I think, I mean, obviously we all know the story, the outline of the story very well because of movies and whatnot, but yeah, I think this is probably my third time reading through, and I'm catching things that, like, I'm like, did I read a abridged version of this? Like, I don't know how you can abridge this, but you know, I don't remember this section at all. You know, maybe just because all I have is the movies. Obviously, I have to edit out the seemingly superfluous stuff. But yeah, there's sections there. I'm like, and so I kind of pause on those parts a little more right now, because I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. I don't remember this at all.
Right. Yeah.
So I guess the last point, and like I said before, there's much more we could go into, but the last point we wanted to touch on was particularly Fred, the nephew, right, who comes, and there's this dialogue that I think really kind of lays out the Fred is in personality wise is in stark contrast to Scrooge, right? He's, you know, as you were mentioning earlier, to me anyway, there's that line in there. Do you have that on?
Yeah, let me pull that out because I
It's
think
like,
this.
well,
Yeah, so Scrooge says to, they're talking about, Christmas being a humbug or being merry at Christmas, and Scrooge says, what right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough. But then the nephew answers back, well, what right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough.
mm-hmm.
Right? So, which I thought was just, brilliant and so concise. If you're going to complain about Fred, or if you're going to challenge Fred on being merry when he doesn't have any money,
Mm-hmm.
well, Scrooge has all this money, and he's not, and he has a right to be merry according to his way of looking at things, and he's not.
Right.
And so, he just turns it right back on him there.
Right. And he doesn't know how to, yeah, he doesn't know how to respond. And yeah, there's a great moral in there that riches don't provide happiness, nor do the lack of riches provide, make for sadness. And we can be happy in spite of, poverty, in spite of a lack of goods. And we can also be miserable with them, And in fact,
Right.
sometimes it's more often that is the case, it seems. You think of, countries where there's a lot more poverty. It does seem that oftentimes people who go and like minister in places like, but they're happy though, and more happy than we are. It's weird. Like why, like we would expect them. Well, why are we happy?
Well,
And so,
they've done studies, and there's an inverse relationship between um, wealth and depression and suicide. And the countries that have the highest gross national product
mm,
often also have the highest rates of depression and suicide. So I think
gosh,
there is, I mean, something that Dickens has hit on in, in the 1800s, before, like, kind of at the dawn of psychology and understanding the workings of the human psyche.
mm-hmm,
Um, but
yeah,
he's tapped into kind of that spiritual truth that there's more to happiness than what we can accomplish in terms of accumulating wealth and things. And um,
yeah. There's I think that there's a it's not just that like happens. Fred has this joy, he's like a joyful character, and like, I don't know, Scrooge is basically the opposite of that. So much the opposite of joy that his name is basically synonymous with joylessness, now, So,
right.
um, but there's a thing we tend to associate it with miserliness, right? Scrooge McDuck, for example, who's not a not a bitter person, but he's just very rich. I mean, bah humbug, right? That's is like everybody knows that phrase now because of Scrooge. It's like this idea of like I don't want to have joy in Christmas. I don't want to joy in anything.
Right. And that's, I mean, I think, you know, maybe one final point is just how influential this book has become. I mean, these are words that are
Yeah.
part of our, at least in the English speaking world, part of, bah humbug, what a Scrooge is
Mm-hmm.
because of this book, and how, just what a, I mean, that's kind of at the level of Shakespeare almost. Some of the things, in Shakespeare's plays, some of the words that he coined that made their way into the English vocabulary.
Right.
Um, and for as short and kind of sentimental and maybe a little heavy-handed at times as it is, it's just brilliant and
Yeah.
a true classic, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, like I said, there's a lot more we could go into, but we'll have plenty of time to revisit things that'll come up, that we can if there's anything we missed on or didn't touch on that we should have, maybe we can always go back and hit on those again as we go through. So this is just Stave 1. We have 4 more to go. The 5th one is much shorter. It's only it's probably like a quarter of the length of the other ones, if that. But
Right.
but this is good. We have Advent coming up this weekend, and so it's kind of a nice little way to start getting ready for Christmas itself. And anyway, this is good.
And since this is our first one that we're doing over several weeks, maybe we could invite our viewers to send in their comments, thoughts, observations, questions, and that we could maybe address or think about, adding to the discussion.
Right. Yeah. I've been, when we've been doing like the short stories, trying to get ideas from people as far as like, just, it's nice when people come and say, hey, I read the story, and here's what I thought. And, but this might be a way to actually kind of incorporate it into, since it's a series rather than just a one story a week. Yeah, maybe we can actually incorporate comments we get, feedback we get from people, if anybody wants to.
Yes, send all the negative feedback to Father. You can send all your questions.
Nice. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, this is our last session.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we'll continue on next week.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you, Father.
Thank you, Deacon. We'll talk to you then.
All right.
All right.
Bye-bye.